But again, this is not going to be shown outside the group. So it's just for the purpose of archiving, of having a good archive with all our meetings. So, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's great to be here with you, with all of you. I have missed the club. I have missed our encounters, our meetings, but I'm very glad that tonight we are going to discuss a very appropriate topic called the demons, of course, going back to Dostoevsky, not just because he's one of my great heroes in terms of literary history, but also because he's talking about psychological developments in various personalities, which are extremely interesting. And so if you are for the first time here, please feel welcome, and please do consider joining formally our club. Obviously, you know that this is a special meeting which takes place every Monday evening for the gold members, and there are only a few gold members because we want to spend time, quality time, with people who invest from many perspectives. They invest time and resources, financial resources, in making this club grow. So just to come back to our discussion, this is the book I have purchased in the United States. I think I was, maybe I was with Troy Nelson when I got this one. So this is a recent translation by Richard Pivia and Larissa Volokonsky, the new translation of Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky's Demons. And once again, to put things into context, this is a book which talks about how the revolutionary ethos comes into being. How do we get selected from millions of people, only a handful of individuals in the position of revolutionary prophets? What is that makes the idea of the revolution so attractive, and what kind of personality do you have to have in order to get on board, so to speak? And tonight we are going to talk about the hero of the book, who was called Nikolai Stavrogin. Some might say Stavrogin, but I'll say still in a Russian form, Stavrogin. The name itself echoes the Greek word Stavros, which means the cross. So somehow he was asked to carry a cross in his life, as we all are being asked to carry our cross. But as you will see at the end of the novel, he declined to carry the cross in the name of Christ. So essentially, he was an atheist, and he declined any kind of theological, metaphysical, philosophical perspective or perspective on life. So coming back to the discussion, the historical context in which the novel was written is pretty familiar to all of you. Dostoevsky, when he was in Germany, he got a letter and a few newspapers from Moscow and St. Petersburg, in which a very shocking event which took place, if I'm not mistaken, in Moscow, was described for the first time by Russian journalists, and the event took place in the following way. So there was a group of revolutionaries, and we had the leader of the revolutionary movement in the person of Nechayev, and there was a bit of resistance against the dictatorial ethos of the leader, and that dissident, so to speak, that opponent, personal opponent of Nechayev, the communist leader in the 1860s, was called Ivan Ivanov. He was just a student at the Faculty of Theology in Moscow, and only because he had the courage, the guts to say no to the leader, he was killed. He was murdered in cold blood, or with cold blood. He was targeted, and then he was, as I said, put to death by a bunch of thugs. And this event, which had a victim in the person of a very young man, as I said, a student of theology, this event shocked the entire nation, It was the beginning, you may call it this way, of modern revolutionary terrorism. Okay, this is a very, very specific modern development of politics. Of course, you have terrorism in our day and age taking place sometimes in the Islamic world, sometimes in our even Western lands. But this was new. This was very new for people in Russia. And Dostoevsky felt compelled to write a novel in which the demonic possession of a number of individuals belonging to this revolutionary sect would be properly explained psychologically and theologically. So he created characters based on what he experienced in Russia in the 1860s. So it's not the product of his fantasy, what we are reading in The Demons. It's more the product of a social development in 19th century Russia. The book starts with a verse from the scriptures from Luke chapter 8, as you remember, and it tells the story of the sick man who gets to be exorcised by Jesus, and then the demons are cast into a herd of swine. But the healing of the sick man is just a metaphor for the transformation of Russia from a Christian country, from a traditional Christian country, into a kind of post-Christian godless society. The demons represent the legions of philosophical and cultural trends, utilitarianism, Marxism, positivism, socialism, and essentially it's more about nihilism, which is the gateway to political mayhem and to, I would call it just straightforwardly, to the Russian Bolshevik Revolution. So you have a new phase in the development of Russia. You have an attempt on behalf of some intellectuals to bring about the alternative to the authoritarian regime of the Tsar, and that attempt to bring about the alternative is basically paved with good intentions, but it presupposes not just philosophically the death of God, but also the death of man. As you shall see, the use of violence is just mandatory for these revolutionaries, which basically storm the intellectual circles of Dostoevsky's times. So he anticipates, Dostoevsky, by writing this book, he anticipates very clearly what happened during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and later on. And he is trying to describe with great genius, literary genius, the tension between traditional Christianity, the Slavophile identity of some intellectuals on the one hand, and the radical westernizing attitudes of other intellectuals on the other hand. This tension is very, very well described by the development of this character, Nikolai or Nicholas Stavrogin. Stavrogin is everything. I have taken him from my heart. This is a quote from Dostoevsky, one of Dostoevsky's letters. He spent a lot of time trying to create this character, which is both enigmatic, but initially seems not to be very, very central, very, very important in the economy of the novel. He is an intellectual. He is, yet again, just like Ivan Karamazov, he's somebody who is both fascinating and horrifying. He's capable to attract lots of people around him. He's handsome, he's strong, he's fearless, he's decadent and refined, but he has to be seen in this complexity with the help of some contrasts, which will become, I think, apparent anytime soon. So Dostoevsky is introducing this character in a chapter which describes a violent encounter between Stavrogin on the one hand and one of his disciples, Shatov. So as I said, Nikolai Stavrogin seems to personify the qualities and the defects of Nechayev, and Shatov seems to personify the moral qualities of the theology students Ivanov. And the shocking experience which we are coming across in part 1, the chapter is called The Wise Serpent, and there's a clear reference to the cleverness of Satan here. The shocking encounter is the following. So we see Shatov again, a dissident of the communist, of the socialist sect in an unknown town, basically being upset with the leader, with Nikolai Stavrogin. He's approaching, while the two of them are in the same room, he's getting close to Nikolai Stavrogin, and suddenly, as Dostoevsky put it, he swung his long, heavy arm and hit him in the face with all his might. Nikolai Stavrogin swayed badly on his feet. Shatov hit him somehow peculiarly, not at all as people ordinarily slap someone in the face, not with his palm, but with his whole fist. And his was a big, heavy, bony fist covered with red hair and freckles. So you have the encounter between a dissident and the leader. So we see from the first pages of the novel a crack in the movement, right? Just like you had a crack in the communist movement between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, just as you had later on a division between the Leninists and the Stalinists, so to speak, in the communist movement. From the very beginning, the Legion of Demons, which is prospering in Russia, in post-Christian Russia, seems to be shattered by lack of cohesion and by lack of unity. And the one who cracks the unity is, as I said, Shatov, who later on will become the Slavophile character, turning to God and trying to find salvation, not in the ideology put forward by the communists, but in Christ himself. Now, after this event takes place, after the encounter, the violent encounter between Shatov and Stavrogin, the author is trying to tell us some aspects, or to describe some aspects of Nikolai Stavrogin's personality. And I will just take the time, with your patience here, I will take the time to read 2 or 3 passages from the book itself. This is the kind of method we are going to try to use more often in the coming months at the club. And the beginning of this description is quite telling. I will remind the leader, says the anonymous voice of the novelist. I will remind the reader once more that Nikolai Stavrogin was one of those natures that knows no fear. In a duel, yeah, like the duel which killed, as you know, the famous poet Pushkin, he would stand cold-bloodedly before his adversary's fire, take aim himself, and kill with brutal calm. If anyone had slapped him in the face, then I think he would he would not even have challenged the offender to a duel, but would have killed him at once on the spot. So what do we have here? We have a conflict, right? The conflict between a dissident and the leader. And the dissident slaps Stavrogin in his face. And what the author tells us, what the narrator tells us, is that typically Stavrogin would have killed the aggressor on the spot. If anyone had slapped him in the face, I think he would have killed him at once on the spot. He was precisely that sort and would kill with full awareness, not at all in rage. I even think that he never knew those blinding fits of wrath that make one unable to reason. For all the boundless anger that would occasionally take possession of him, he was always able to preserve complete self-control and, therefore, to realize that for killing someone otherwise than in a duel, he would certainly be sent to hard labor. Nevertheless, he would still have killed the offender, and that without the slightest hesitation. Okay? So who is he? He is the aristocrat who is growing up in a family without a father properly, the mother being Varvara Petrovna, a fiancée of Stepan Trofimovich, the liberal. He's growing up in a very kind of cosmopolitan atmosphere under the guidance of a liberal who does not believe in God, but who is hoping to see in Russia some social reforms, liberating the serfs and bringing more social justice. Stavrogin is somebody who goes to visit various places like Germany, Egypt, Iceland, which is not a civilization, but more of a land. He's trying to be to get the best education in Switzerland and in France as well, in Paris, particularly in Paris. Stavrogin is a very gifted young man who comes back home in Russia still without any kind of sense of purpose. He has spent a lot of time in Europe exploring decadent ways of being, sometimes engaging in a behavior which one could call profligate, and oftentimes abusing women, and sometimes making scandalous moves in the public forum, slapping people around, provoking, and even asking military soldiers to engage in a duel with him. He is a very interesting character. He is both a Russian and a Westerner. He is able to show cruelty, but at the same time, he shows a certain tenderness, which is attractive, especially for the women surrounding him. He is devoured by ideas. He's trying to replace traditional Christianity with secular philosophy. He's struggling with his sense of disbelief. He doesn't believe in God anymore. He wants to have some faith. He's a bit like Faust in Goethe. He wants to have faith, but he's unable to actually believe in anything but in himself. So he's left only with this tormenting conscience. He's constantly asking, he's constantly pondering whether he's doing the right thing. But as you can see, when he's tested, so to speak, when he's subjected to the kind of experience which Christ himself had to suffer in front of Pontius Pilate. Remember, he was slapped on his face, tortured and ridiculed, okay? And Christ kept silent. And Christ even was able to say, Father, forgive their sins, for they know nothing, or they know not what they do. When he was, as I said, tested, Stavrogin showed this capacity to kill. What is striking in his passage, as I said, from the book, I'm sorry you cannot see it properly. What is striking is that Dostoevsky is repeating the word kill, to kill, many, many times. I think 5 times he tells us that Stavrogin is able to kill without any hesitation. He was a character who wanted to overcome cowardice. So he was a proud man. Stavrogin was somebody who could shoot his adversary in a duel, go against a bear if needed be, and fight off a robber in the forest without any sense of enjoyment, but solely out of unpleasant necessity, listlessly, lazily, even with boredom. Okay? So what we can get from this description is that Stavrogin was made of that material, which probably led to the production or to the creation of various characters, historical characters such as Goebbels, Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, Beria, and a few others. Again, cold-blooded, being able to kill, let me repeat this from Dostoevsky, without any sense of enjoyment, out of necessity, even with boredom. Now, and pay attention please to this detail, there was perhaps more anger in Nikolai Stavrogin than in those who preceded him historically, that's what he says. But this anger was cold, calm, and, if one may put it so, reasonable, and therefore the most repulsive and terrible that can be. Okay? So this is the paradox in Stavrogin's personality. The capacity to kill and to be rational at the same time, to be cold and full of anger at the same time. So clearly he is quite somebody. He has a brain fever, but he's also rational. And now, because we talk about anger as being a kind of quintessential aspect of Stavrogin's character, I thought I should go back to the church fathers and look at the way in which people such as Evagrius of Pontus would describe the passion, the tendency to fall into anger, into the sin of wrath. Now, as you probably know, in the fourth century in Egypt, there were many monks who specialized in self-scrutiny. There were many monks who tried to see how these passions come about. What is the definition of pride? What is the definition of anger? How do they, as passions, control our soul? These were the kind of questions that especially the monastics of Egypt in the 4th century were asking, with a specific desire to reach a state of stillness, of apatheia in their own heart. Now, there is a book by Evagrius of Pontus called Praktikos, okay? So with your help, I can put it down here, Praktikos, Estera. So Praktikos by Evagrius of Pontus. So he was a deacon in Constantinople initially. He was a womanizer. He was a very worldly and vain man. And at some point he felt he is sort of losing any kind of form of grace, any form of grace from God. And he felt compelled to repent and go into the desert, which he did. He was extremely intelligent. He was very clever. He knew the scriptures by heart. And so he's starting to write these ascetic, spiritual treatises, so to speak, tracts, if you want. about the 7 cardinal sins and so on and so forth. And one of the books, which was translated into Romanian, English, I think, and Russian as well, and probably Dostoevsky knew about it, is Practicos. You get a similar kind of treatment, a similar kind of exegesis of the 7 sins in the writings of John Cassian, who was born, funnily enough, in present-day Romania, in Dobrogea, and he was a guy who wrote in Latin most of his books, and he traveled from Romania to Egypt, and then from Egypt, where he found the disciples of Evagrius, he went to Italy, and in Italy he produced, as I said, his own spiritual psychological documents, and they were also integrated in the famous book called the Philokalia. Okay, this is the book which was translated into Russian, the Philokalia. I will ask the Philokalia or Philokalia. This was a book which was translated into Russian by the end of the 18th century. Okay, so it was initially published in Greek, in Venice, by a great spiritual monk from Mount Athos, Nicodemus the Agorite, and then this book, the Philokalia, which includes Evagrius and John Cassian, this was translated into Church Slavonic, and then probably Dostoevsky had access to this. Okay, this is why I'm talking about anger in the Church Fathers, because we know for sure that Dostoevsky read a great Syriac Church Father called Isaac the Syrian. Okay, these are just facts of history that we must take into account. So it's very likely that when Dostoevsky described Stavrogin, he had in mind some forms of spiritual illness, which were very, very well diagnosed by these early monastic spiritual writers of 4th and 5th century Christianity. Now let's go and read Evagrius. Okay, are you still with me, guys? Have I lost you?
Yes, we are still here.
Okay, so the most fierce passion is anger, says Evagrius. So of all the passions that we are struggling with, okay, the most fierce passion is anger. In fact, it is defined. You can see here in the chat rubric. Okay, the definition. This is Practicos, chapter 11. Okay, Practicos, chapter 11. The best book about this author is Gabriel Bunge. Okay, he's a Benedictine monk, and I spent 6 weeks with him in the Alps, in Switzerland. Okay, I was 21 years old. I spent 6 weeks with him, and I realized it's pretty hard to be a monk. So I went into the world and I started to commit sins. Anyway, so coming back to Evagrius. Okay, so this is the quote. Anger is defined as a boiling and stirring up of wrath against one who has given injury or is thought to have done so. So as you can see, imagination plays an important role. You can stir up a feeling of anger against an imaginary enemy. Sometimes that enemy doesn't need to be real. Okay, so you become angry. It constantly irritates the soul, and above all, at the time of prayer, it seizes the mind and flashes the picture of the offensive person before one's eyes. Then there comes a time when it persists longer, is transformed into indignation. This is an interesting move. From anger to indignation, los indignados. There's a book about this movement, far left movement, okay? BLM, Antifa, and the rest, called los indignados. So this sense of indignation stirs up the soul, especially by night. So it can give you insomnia, yeah, sleeplessness. You are full of anger. The images of those who have offended you come back, always come back. You're trying to calm your soul. You're trying to pray. You're trying to be at peace with yourself, with God, and with the world, but you cannot be at peace with yourself. Why? Because the imagination is constantly bringing up, you know, images, pictures, moments from the past, your past or the past of other people. And you are under siege. And this state of mind is succeeded sometimes by a general debility of the body. Sometimes people who are angry can actually experience a kind of weakening of their physical power, malnutrition with its attendant pallor, and the illusion of being attacked by poisonous wild beasts. Now, please bear in mind, this passage was written by Evagris in the Egyptian desert. Okay, so he's talking about people who spend a lot of time in solitude, but nonetheless, okay, the general treatment seems to be convincing. So you have two forms of, I would say, spiritual disease with Stavrogin. On the one hand, you have pride, which is an action. On the other hand, you have wrath or anger, which is a reaction. Okay, you can be proud without necessarily being angry, but when you are angry, you try to react to something which you consider to be a form of injustice done to you. Anger is somehow natural as a movement of our heart. So it's okay to be angry when you, for instance, have fallen short of the mark. When you, for instance, have committed a sin, you can be angry against yourself. Jesus was angry when he went into the temple and found, instead of prayerful people, he found people trying to get a good deal at somebody's expense, buying and selling stuff. And so he was angry, and he tried to clean the temple of God, as you will be reminded very soon, because this passage from the Bible is going to be read during the Palm Sunday. Okay, so anger sometimes can be useful, but sometimes can actually, instead of honoring God and rejecting the abuse, can sometimes become a very destructive, a very self-destructive passion of the soul. And it's especially dangerous, anger becomes especially dangerous when this passion is directed against the innocent people surrounding us. And you will see in the book that anger is a defining characteristic, not just of Stavrogin, but also of his disciple called Piotr Stepanovich Verhovensky. Okay, so Dostoevsky was so subtle in his psychological diagnosis that he very quickly realized that the communist movement, that the socialist ideology is being nourished, fed by this sense of anger and indignation towards the status quo, towards the political order of the day. What else can I tell you about Dostoevsky? Well, what do you think will happen with Shatov? Well, obviously, Shatov is going to suffer the fate of Ivan Ivanov, the fate of the theological student, of the student of theology at the hands of Nechayev. Shatov will be killed, and this is the plot. Okay, how can Stavrogin kill Shatov after Shatov offended the leader, the mentor, the visionary intellect of the movement? How can Stavrogin take revenge without necessarily using his own hands in this act of revenge? Okay, and just like in the brothers Karamazov, just like with Ivan Karamazov, Stavrogin is just plotting the killing of the enemy. Okay, so you have Piotr or Pierre being in the position of the lackey, of the useful idiot who is orchestrating the murder of Shatov. Okay, the same way in the brothers Karamazov, you have Smerdyakov. I hope you will recollect this character. You have you have Smerdyakov, the lackey of Ivan, killing the father. That is Karamazov Sr. So we must pay attention to this development. Before we do that, however, let me also quote from Dostoevsky a few more passages, okay, which describe again this hero, or you may call him an anti-hero. So please remember the fact that I have tried to draw a parallel between him and Jesus Christ, because in Dostoevsky you always get individuals or characters trying to imitate Christ, like in the good old Christian tradition. A good Christian life is a kind of imitatio Christi life, and Alyosha is doing this, Father Zosima is doing this, Sonia is trying to do this in Crime and Punishment, but Stavrogin seems to be unable to do this. Bishop Tihon is doing it, but Stavrogin cannot do it. Okay, so in a sense he is the opposite of Christ, but moreover, because he is trying to orchestrate the entire destruction of the political and of the moral order which kept Russia, which maintained Russia as a Christian nation on the world stage, he is being described and depicted as the Antichrist. Okay, so if you are looking at the ways in which great novelists, great philosophers, especially in the 19th century, described the Antichrist figure, I would recommend to you two authors. One is Dostoevsky, and please pay careful attention to Stavrogin. The other one is Vladimir Solovyov, okay, with his famous tales about the Antichrist. Now, the two were friends. Is that, do you think, just an accident? The two of them, Solovyov and Dostoevsky, were great friends. Dostoevsky was the greatest Russian writer of the 19th century, and Solovyov was the greatest Russian philosopher of the 19th century. Two true geniuses, or genuine geniuses, if you want, who went together to Father Ambrosi at Optina Pustin in the monastery, where they were trying to find the Orthodox ethos, so to speak, which was lost to the Russian intelligentsia. Okay. Now, in the description that we are provided with by Dostoevsky, we are told that Nikolai Stavrogin had a special physiognomy. Troy, can I use the word physiognomy? Is that a good word for
I think you better define it a little bit more before I would even recognize it.
So physiognomies is the plural here used by the translator. The way in which the image or the visage or the face of the character looks like. Okay.
Yeah. And obviously that's the correct word if it's used, but I would say probably
countenance.
Yes, exactly.
The countenance of Stavrogin is very, very telling. Now, somehow, as a good psychologist, Dostoevsky pays a lot of attention to these details. Okay, the face of the individual is very telling. We have a very nice saying in Romanian, "Te spune fața cum ți-e viața." Okay, so the way in which your face looks is very indicative of the kind of lifestyle you have embraced, at least for a while. So, as Nikolai Stavrogin enters the stage, okay, in this novel, he's being described as a youthful character. His faint smile was as officially benign and just as self-satisfied. His glance was stern, thoughtful, and as if distracted. In short, it seemed we had parted only yesterday. But one thing struck me. Before, even though he had been considered a handsome man, his face had indeed resembled a mask. A certain vicious-tongued ladies of our society put it. Whereas now, 4 years later, after his return from Switzerland, I don't know why, but he appeared to me, that is the narrator, at very first sight, as decidedly, unquestionably handsome, so that it could in no way be said that his face resembled a mask. Was it because he had become a bit paler than before and seemed to have lost some weight? Or was there perhaps some new thought that now shone in his eyes? So we are seeing Stavrogin as the one who resembles a mask when it comes to his countenance. So that tells you there is a contrast. There's a tension between the essence and the appearance of a character. And Stavrogin from a very early age was capable to hide the essence of his personality under a very, very attractive appearance. So the question to you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, would be, how do you recognize a demonic character? Because we tend to believe, just like Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century, that we were born good from nature. And we tend to think that the kids that sometimes surround us are beautiful creatures of God. And there's no evil apart from, the societal diseases we encounter every day. But there is no intrinsic evil when it comes to human nature. That's our kind of standard approach in our day and age, especially when we think about ways in which we can educate our children. We tend to underestimate the capacity of the human being or of the human nature to produce evil thoughts and to entertain evil activities. We just cannot accept that under the appearance of a kind of beautiful, handsome student, this evil conspirator can actually exist and even produce catastrophic outcomes for the society. What is even more shocking at the end of the novel, as you probably know, is the fact that Stavrogin has to make his confession. And when Stavrogin has to make his confession, he has to tell Bishop Tihon that when he was in Switzerland or in Western Europe, he had committed a heinous crime. He had defiled the innocence of a child, of a 12-year-old young lady. One might still call her a child. So in essence, and I hope this is not too shocking for you, Stavrogin was a pedophile. That's why Dostoevsky is so powerful in his message, especially when we read it today. Because you might think, okay, I have been invited by Prince Andrew from Great Britain and by Jeffrey Epstein and by, I don't know, maybe former President Bill Clinton to a party. It's just an innocent invitation. What's wrong with saying yes to a former president of the United States? What is wrong to say yes to a formal invitation extended by a member of the royal family of Britain, of Great Britain, the brother of Prince Charles, Prince Andrew, actively participated in the meetings which were taking place with the help of the Lolita Express, which was a special kind of private jet, bringing these filthy rich individuals on the sex island a few years ago. Being part of that gang seemed to be just, you know, an interesting fact of life. And being as a young lady invited to participate, to attend such meetings, didn't quite look as dark as it happened to be. The whole kind of scenario, the whole kind of experience. So my question, which is very, very practical to you, is how do we teach our kids? How do we educate our teenagers about the traps of cynical figures such as Stavrogin, such as Epstein, such as, who knows, Prince Andrew? How can we educate them? How can we inform them? How can we develop in their psyche a sense of discernment, this very special spiritual gift, the gift of discernment? Probably you'll remember that the wife of Bill Clinton, Melinda, I think, okay? The wife of Bill Clinton, she spent like half an hour with Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile, who later on committed suicide, or maybe was just murdered. We don't know. And after half an hour, she said, well, let me tell you, it was just impossible to spend that much time with him. I felt it was my darkest hour. Okay. So even like secular people, I mean, the wife of Bill Gates was not a saint. She was not really into religion at all. She was just a formal Catholic. But even for a normal human being exposed to the seductive personality of a pedophile is very, very disturbing. And this is the story of Stavrogin. He was seen as a prince. He was seen as a hero. He was a great, brave man, able to challenge everybody. But at the same time, he was a savage individual capable of beastly behavior. And of course, with the burden of his sin, upon his shoulders. At the end of the book, we find out that he was unable to repent, and that's why he decides at the end of the book to commit suicide. He was a quiet and thinking personality. He was an interesting man who studied theology and philosophy, who started a military career at the beginning of his life, but he ended up basically in the abyss of self-deception and self-destruction. The question for all of us is, what can predict in the early stages of human personality such developments? Is there anything that we can detect early on in the development of such a promising personality? Is there anything that we can find out which would tell us what sort of outcome can we expect from such an individual? And then, of course, is what kind of spiritual resistance can we put forward against such a seductive individual? Please remember that he was a beautiful young man. He was not an ugly looking person like Socrates, for instance. Socrates was ugly. We know from Isaiah 53 that also Christ himself was his face was distorted by the passion on the cross. But you know, Stavrogin was wearing a mask, was capable of hiding his evil intentions, and somehow he elevated himself to the level of a revolutionary god, because around him we see a legions of individuals able to follow his commandments, able and willing to execute his orders. He's never actually putting his own hand, his bloody hands, on anybody. But as you will find out in the novel, he's able to motivate, to justify ideologically, philosophically, the crimes committed against innocent individuals. So the practical questions for all of us would sound like this. What is the difference between a manipulative character and an influencer? How do we dissociate between influence and manipulation? What about truth? The paradox of truth. Can somebody who is not able to tell the truth about himself, to make a full and proper confession of his or of her sins, is somebody like this able to be a leader? Is the Prince of Darkness somebody able to dissolve the distinction between good and evil? And if so, in the name of what reality can we actually dissolve the distinction between good and evil? In the name, perhaps, of a future reality. And that's a very interesting tactic. The reality of today is not good, but listen, I'm promising you something which is so exciting, which is so full of splendor, that you might consider even putting into brackets traditional notions of virtue and sin or vice. And once you put those notions into brackets, you will emancipate yourself from an entire tradition, and you'll become a member of a revolutionary movement which will bring about the so-called promise of a new era. And this is what actually the devil does, I think. or Antichrist does, okay? He is promising a better world than the one which God himself created. Please pay attention to this small detail. The devil never comes to promise you something which is unattractive. The devil comes to tell you, okay, let's get together and let's create a new reality which is better than the reality promised by Christ himself. This is a haunting book. This is an incredible book. And I'm so happy we had the time tonight to speak about it. But again, it's just one part of the book that we are trying to dissect. In the coming weeks, I hope to be able to look at other characters, including the disciple of Stavrogin, Piotr Verhovensky. While Stavrogin is, so to speak, the thinker, the visionary, the philosopher, Piotr, or Pierre, as they say, was the political activist, okay? And it will be very interesting next week to talk about the ideas put forward by Piotr Verhovensky and by his entire sect altogether. Now, I shall pause, and of course, you are kindly invited to make your own remarks, contribution to this conversation, and so to speak, the floor is yours. Estera?
Thank you very much. It's
Listen,
very nice to have you here back.
1 minute, because I need to hydrate. So you take your time, 1 minute. I need to get a glass of water. Thank you.
Okay, take your time. If you have any questions, just let us know. Or if you want to share something about the book.
I hope this was not a dark presentation. I hope this was not too provocative for you. But this is the genius of Dostoevsky. He's able to plunge into the depths which typically are ignored by, you know, the chit chat of contemporary media outlets. So that's why I think we should go back to him. Do you know why Shatov slapped Stavrogin in his face? Have you ever wondered why did he do that? Well, because Stavrogin left his wife pregnant. It's that simple. Okay? So Shatov was married to a wonderful lady, Maria, that was her name. And Shatov was a member of the revolutionary movement. And once he got married, he started to have a greater sense of personal responsibility. He realized that the utopia which was put forward by the revolutionaries, by the communists, by the socialists, was something which would never make his family happy. But he wasn't quite sure whether he was the father of the child that his wife was expecting, and the rumors, of course, were telling him that in fact it was Stavrogin who fathered the child. Now, as he was trying to extract himself from the group, and please, this is another question: when does a group become a sect? Okay, this is a powerful question for all of us. When does a group transform itself, become a sect? A closed, right, secular, we can call it congregation. So when he wanted to get rid of this madness, the madness of destroying the old order and bringing instead of the old order something radically new, when Shatov wanted to get rid of this, he started to contemplate, you know, going back to the traditional Christianity of the Russian peasant, and he indeed embraced. He did embrace at the end traditional Orthodox Christianity, but this is the opposite of what Stavrogin expected him to do. And so when he found out that Stavrogin left his wife pregnant, he was full of fury, and he slapped him in his face. And so Stavrogin, this is the plot, gets slapped, gets to be humiliated publicly in front of his mother, Varvara Petrovna, and so he's plotting now the revenge. So that's how actually the novel starts. Okay, so let me help you with this. So you have Varvara Petrovna Stavrogina, that's the mother. The father is just absent. This is another interesting fact. So in Dostoevsky, typically when the father is absent, something tragic happens. So this is probably relevant both in spiritual, theological, and psychological terms. Okay, so when the father is just absent from the life of the son, then something dubious, something very bad happens. This is the story of Dmitri and the story of Ivan. They both hate their kind of biological father because he's just a profligate. Fyodor Pavlovich is spending his money on, you know, alcohol, and he's trying to seduce women. That's all he does. And so this is the disaster unfolding in the brothers Karamazov. In the Demons, what we get is a different kind of disaster. So you have General Stavrogin, an elderly man, the husband of Varvara Petrovna, passing away very early on in the novel. And then you have a kind of fake fatherhood, which is personified by this fake fatherhood is personified by Stepan Trofimovich. Okay, Stepan Trofimovich is a very interesting character. He's the elderly spiritual father or mentor of Stavrogin himself, but he's a liberal. He's not a progressive. He's not a progressive revolutionary. He's more of a moderate liberal, agnostic. This is Stepan Trofimovich. He doesn't believe necessarily in religion. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe that human nature can be changed overnight. But because he's unable to grasp the reality of negativity, so to speak, because he's unable to understand the demonic aspect of the fallen human nature, of the human revolt against God and against the divine creation, he ends up with both his biological son, that's Piotr, that's the biological son of Stepan Trofimovich, and with the spiritual son, that is Nikolai Stavrogin. Both of his sons, the biological one and the spiritual one, or the ideological one, end up revolting against the father. Okay, so it's an interesting thing here. What is the essence of Lucifer's action? It's the revolt. So the Christian narrative, the biblical narrative about God and his creation is the following. You have the good Lord, the good God, creating a world in which everything is perfect. But somehow the serpent, that is the evil spirit, gets to somehow pervert Adam's mindset and transform Adam into an instrument of a demonic revolt, indignation against God himself. So without this revolt, there is no catastrophe. So in a sense, we have to look at the the revolutionary movement as being grounded in this sense of ingratitude. Okay, what is the commandment in the one of the 10 commandments in the Old Testament? Honor thy father and thy mother. Honor thy father and thy mother. What are they doing instead? They are taking the Mickey, so to speak. They dishonor Stepan Trofimovich. Okay, so the two sons, Stavrogin and Pierre, or Piotr, the two sons, they both go against the father. And the father cannot tame them, cannot stop them from doing that. So the whole catastrophe unfolds. But starting from this moment of direct challenge, revolt against God the Father, so to speak. And Christ is just the opposite of Stavrogin. Christ is doing the will of the Father. Christ is obeying the commandments. Christ on the cross is silent and prayerful. He's not arguing. He's not even arguing with Pilate, with Pontius Pilate. Christ is not arguing with Anna and Caiaphas, with the religious leaders of the Jewish temple. He's not arguing with them. He's always silent. And that's the force of Christ. And please go back to the Grand Inquisitor and you'll find the same pattern. Jesus is silent against the Inquisitor. He doesn't say anything. Why? Because he's not entering this argumentative mode. Okay? Back and forth, back and forth. That's what fuels, I would say, anger. Okay? So when you have the spirit of anger, of wrath, descending upon you, probably the best thing would be just to keep silent. But that's so hard. Okay? It's so hard. So I think this is a very, very, very subtle novel. Honestly, I really like it. And the more I read about it and the more I read it or reread it, the more I like Dostoevsky's spiritual and psychological acumen. So who wants to make a comment, ask a question? You're more than welcome to do so.
Can I put a question?
Please do.
Do we live in a similar world of nihilists, like Dostoevsky said, in this globalist era?
Why do you think anything has changed? Why would we be in a different world than Dostoevsky's world? Absolutely. The only difference is that in the past, people would hide their sins, and in the present, they are just showing off. So I was shocked when I found out that in a magazine in the United States, there was an article, but also in a TEDx lecture, there was a presentation in which somebody felt the need to defend the pedophiles as being just, ordinary human beings who have some form of, weakness, but after all, we can understand them. We can be more tolerant. So a society in which the innocence of the children is under attack is certainly a society in which the demonic principle is very active. Because Christ said at some point when he wanted to indicate how will the kingdom of God look like, he said, unless you will be as innocent as these children, you will not enter the kingdom. So there's a certain innocence about the children, I didn't say, like a fully fledged innocence, but a certain innocence. For instance, a certain capacity among children to forgive and also to forget. So once we've lost that innocence in our children, once we sexualize or over-sexualize our children and we turn them into adults, we have lost even, I would say, the very image of God in us. And the devil is constantly trying to destroy that image by leading the human being not into the kingdom, but rather into our debased state, which is closer to the animal world than to the world of angels. So clearly we are seeing something which is rather bizarre and strange in the West. I don't recall, I mean, I've studied the history of the Western civilization for quite some time. I know that in Pompeii and Herculaneum, that is Italy, the year 70, 72, rich Romans would very easily go to a brothel and, you know, would perhaps even use pornography. But that's not something new. What is new in our world, in our day and age, is the fact that some filthy rich individuals can consider the participation of innocent children in their orgies as just a legitimate thing. That's something new. The Romans would never consider that children could be part of those orgies. I mean, on the contrary, we know that there were special forms of punishment for those acts. So beastly acts were being treated and punished accordingly in those days, but not now. And that's shocking. And it's also very sad. That's why we need to read again Dostoevsky and the great classics. But as you know, it was very hard for Dostoevsky himself to publish the Confession of Stavrogin. That's the last chapter of the book. And the last chapter of the book was turned down 2 times by the editor. He had an editor, I think Katkov, that's his name, and that was his name. And the pages in which Stavrogin made his confession were never published in Dostoevsky's time. So we get to see those pages only in 1923, when Anna Grigorievna found the revised version of the chapter called At Tikhon. The Russian publisher decided to include that chapter, which is very telling and very, very revealing. Okay.
Maria wants to ask a question, I think.
Please do.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Mihail. Not necessarily a question, more of a just an observation from what I've read about Russian Christianity at Dostoevsky. I think it's one of the books by Nikifor Krainik. And one of the analogies he was making in the book, I didn't read the whole book, but I did read part of it. And he was talking about Dostoevsky genius, which you alluded to as well. And he was kind of making a parallel between Dante, Shakespeare, and Dostoevsky. And he was emphasizing the fact that Dostoevsky is the writer who discovered the spirit in human nature, unlike Shakespeare, who he considers being a psychologist. And I think Berdiev is the one actually who had this parallel between all three. He's calling Dostoevsky pneumatolog, which is like the I don't know how to say that in English, but pneumatology, I think it's the Holy Spirit.
Is the science of the Holy Spirit, one could say. Yeah.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit. So he calls Dostoevsky pneumatologist, if that's the version of it. Unlike Shakespeare, who's a psychologist, or like he's more into the psychology of human nature, but Dostoevsky is kind of like he emphasizes the spirit and all these, constant fight between good and evil. It's kind of like he calls the heaven and earth, like Rai and Yat, like Infern, all together in Dostoevsky's characters, unlike Dante and Shakespeare, who focus more on either one or the other, like the characters kind of go back between the two, whereas Dostoevsky character like embed these two together, and the characters frământări. How do you say that? The characters exactly, it has both of them.
Yes, it's very true that Dostoevsky read Shakespeare at great length, and at some point we have even a comparison between Prince Harry and Stavrogin. Clearly, Dostoevsky, as a Christian writer, more than Shakespeare, was aware of the fact that we are encountering sometimes invisible forces which pertain to the spiritual, not just to the emotional. And clearly, from that perspective, Dostoevsky is more in line with Dante. Dante was just as much aware of the fact that we are not only psyche and we are not just bodily realities, but we are also spiritual realities. We are always the crossroads between the psyche and the spirit. And I would say this is the genius indeed of Dostoevsky. But the problem with the modern age is that we do not teach our kids that there is something called the invisible reality of the spiritual forces. We don't think it's good to talk about these things. So we have reduced Christianity to mere ethics. You know my argument against Protestant liberal theology. I have nothing against my beloved Protestant friends. I mean, I love my friends who are Protestants, but most of them are evangelical, so they go against liberal Protestantism, which is even better. But at some point, especially in 19th century Germany, you had great historians of Christianity, such as Adolf von Harnack. Okay, so he's the greatest historian. I would say one of the greatest historians of all ages. I mean, he had such a comprehensive knowledge of Christianity that probably very few people can match that knowledge today. Probably the only one would be Jaroslav Pelikan. But when he had to say what is the essence, das Wesen der Christentum, yeah, as he put it, the essence of Christianity, he essentially said, well, Christianity, mere Christianity, reduced to its essence, is just an ethical doctrine. It's just, an essay in ethics. And that's so disappointing, because as Solovyov put it, ethics is just the hygiene of spiritual life, but it's just the beginning. It's not the essence of spiritual life. Okay. So, yeah, there is something deeper about Christianity, which Dostoevsky was very much aware of. And I believe there are lots of writers today, even in the Protestant world, who talk about the demonic and the spiritual. So that's a good thing, because we have retrieved the biblical roots of Christianity. So what Dostoevsky is doing is, I think, very sound and very healthy. He's telling us to look at the Bible and to look at the biblical Christianity in a way which is not deformed by philosopher who tried. Am I?
I think yeah, you are. It's okay.
So the first philosopher who tried to reduce, the richness, the spiritual richness of traditional Christianity to ethics and reason was Immanuel Kant, and he wrote in the 18th century a book called Religion innerhalb der Vernunftsgrenzen, something like this. So inside religion, inside or within rational limits. Okay, so why should you actually do that? Why would you do that? So, only in order to tame religion, probably. That was the reason behind Kant's move. He wanted to tame, okay, to make religion less wild, less dangerous. Okay, so that's the first move on behalf of the modern philosophers of the Enlightenment in their attempt to privatize religion. So when religion becomes a matter of private thinking, then we don't see any kind of public debate about religious truth. My truth is different from yours. But then my question to you would be, is there any truth in my private feeling if it's only private? If it's something you cannot share, you cannot share, then where is the truth in it? So if it's just private, without devoid of any public relevance, then where is the truthful aspect of religion, of the revelation? So Dostoevsky doesn't believe in that private sort of dimension of religion. He thinks that we have to make a public confession of Christ. And he's doing that through the means of literature, by using his gifts. Thank God he didn't become a politician, not even a member of the, but there was no Russian Duma in those days. There was no parliament, so there was no temptation for him to join any party or to become an MEP or member of parliament. So that's good. So he gave us a lot. Instead of becoming a politician, he wanted to leave a legacy, a literary legacy, which is so telling today. So thank you for your question. Certainly he is more in line with Dante than with Shakespeare from that perspective. But again, he was a great reader of Shakespeare. That's why I'm glad Mr. Papahaji came to enlighten us. What did he do? Did he talk about Shakespeare? Okay. Yeah. So listen, I think it's quite late, and we tend to spend less than 90 minutes every time we get together. But I am very grateful for your presence, because this is something that makes me work harder. And without you, I would be just a lazy public intellectual. In your presence, I feel I should go back to my scholarly habit of reading closely the text. And so next time, I think we should stick to Dostoevsky, because I'm trying to encourage you to read Dostoevsky before Easter, if possible, okay? So let's stick to Dostoevsky's novel. And in particular, this year, I want to spend more time reading The Demons and later on Crime and Punishment. And once we are done with the 3 novels, so last year we've covered the Grand Inquisitor, and of course, Brothers Karamazov. This year we are going to do The Demons and Crime and Punishment. Maybe next year we could do, God willing, The Idiot and the Teenager or the Adolescent. And once we've done that, we can say safely that we have covered one of the top 10 writers ever. Okay, he's being ranked as one of the top 10 writers in the world in the history of humankind. So I think that's quite an accomplishment. If we can do that, that's great. So let's meet next Monday. And by the way, next Monday we are going to talk about ideology and about Piotr Verhovensky, the leader of the socialist sect, and my kind request for you would be to read, let me tell you what chapter to read from the book, at least one chapter. Please do that for me out of courtesy. There is a chapter called just a second. Ivan the Tsarevich, part 2, chapter 8. Ivan the Tsarevich. You will understand the suggestion, the allusion. I will not explain it now, but it's an interesting chapter. Okay, it's about the ideology of the sect of the group. Estera, what are the news for this week?
For this week, first of all, we are going to meet tomorrow with Mr. Gabriel Olario, who is going to do us a presentation on business according to the Bible principles. And then on Wednesday evening, we are going to meet with Father Daniel Buddha, who is going to do us a presentation on the theology of history.
Okay.
And then we are going to see each other on Monday. But that's not all.
Events, yeah, please.
Yes, we have our offline events in Oradea, in Cluj, and in Târgu Mureș. So for those of you who are close to Oradea, Cluj, or Târgu Mureș, do go and see Mihail at the conferences about atheism or Christianity. We are going to have lots of guests there, and we would like you to be there with us.
In fact, we have 4 meetings. One is in Turda. One shouldn't forget about Mihai Viteazu, Mihai the Brave. So he was killed in Turda, so that's why we go there. I hope I will not get killed. But I'm not Mihai the Brave. So listen, we have very special guests. One of them is Adrian Papahanci coming on Friday. He's going to speak at the book launching event in Cluj. We have Father Stelian Tofana, who is a great biblical scholar, a great theologian from Transylvania. He's again going to be present at the meeting on Friday evening. We have also good friends, one of the most accomplished evangelical theologians in Romania today, Ghiță Mocan, is going to attend the event in Oradea. So I kindly recommend that you talk to your friends about these events. And of course, if you have not registered with us, if you are not a full member of the gold circle, then please do consider joining us formally, because we badly need you. We need to spread the word around. We need to publish books. We need to travel the world. And of course, the good news is that we are going to travel still to the United States. I might be again invited to Chicago and to Florida this summer. If you are interested still in having a Detox Your Mind event, then do consider becoming volunteers for this event, okay? Because we need you just as well. We have a very small managerial committee, and I try to avoid putting too much burden on Estera, because we also plan to have events. We are planning to have events this autumn, and I'm glad I've seen our beloved friend Claudio Arieșan. We have 3 major events being prepared right now for October, November, and December. Okay, we have some money. I have to say this. We have received some money, and that's so good, because typically we handle everything with our own money, but this time we have received some sponsorship from a public institution in Timișoara, and we will have Father Constantine Kula coming on the 6th of December to Timișoara. We are going to have Adrian Papahanci giving a lecture on Julius Caesar publicly in Timișoara, I think mid-October. And we are going to have the greatest Roman Catholic theologian, together with Horia Roman Patapievici, that is Wilhelm Danke, the priest, and the philosopher Horia Roman Patapievici. They will be in Timișoara by mid-November this year. So we have lots of events taking place, and we also plan to do more. But if you are willing to help with a Detox Your Mind event in September, then please write an email to Estera and we will make you part of the team. We have to postpone the event in Bukovina because of the refugee crisis. There's no way we can do it in July for many reasons. As you know, most of the hotels and many places which were used for tourism in Suceava County, in Iași, have been used in the past month or so for sheltering the refugees from Ukraine. So given the proximity of Ukraine to Bukovina, we have to change places. Probably we will do an event in Sinaia by mid-September, okay? So please have some patience and please be more active perhaps in creating these events, and probably we can get together for a Detox Your Mind event, as I said, by mid-September, again in Sinaia, because that's a great place to be. Thank you so much. Good night. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice
See you
evening.
tomorrow.